Gil Carvalho and a top cardiologist purportedly discuss the link between death and cholesterol.
People with low cholesterol level tend to die more. We
Well, in the people that have been studied for the duration of time that they were studied for, if it was a prospective study instead of a snapshot style study. Yes.
consistently in large population studies. And so this has become a frequently asked question. So I decided to ask Dr. Chris Packard about this. He is professor of vascular biochemistry at the University of Glasgow, and he's really one of the top experts on the planet on heart disease, cholesterol, and inflammation.
Well, we'll see if that actually means anything. Let's see if he actually knows the etiology of heart disease.
Cholesterol level and the mortality. This is still a frequently asked question. There is an association between lower levels of cholesterol and actually within the normal range and a higher risk of mortality in some.
No, not risk. Gil, it's not risk. It is an association. So risk necessarily implies causality. So no, not risk. It's associated with a higher incidence. Now you're talking about an association which immediately puts into question the strength of the association, the amount of confounders and spurious variables that are actually present in that observed association, the conversion of the relative differences in incidence into absolute levels, since you're talking about longitudinal large population studies, which is oftentimes completely useless, not in any way utilitarian at all. So all of those things are put into question, as well as some more slight, sort of irrelevant details about the study's conduction. The repeatability of the study, you just said that this has been shown time and time again. Sure, fair enough. But also, you're talking about overall mortality. You're not even talking about heart disease. You're just talking about overall mortality, which makes it even less specific. Because I mean, diabetes and um, arthritis, for example, are completely different. They all have common denominators because they're all diseases, but they're quite irrelevant. So anyway, okay.
These epidemiological studies. And so a lot of people have taken that to mean that lowering cholesterol or even normalizing cholesterol causes risk of death to go up.
Well, you can't inform upon that with that study. There is no evidence to support that claim. That is an opinion. Not to mention that your cholesterol levels fluctuate all the time. They vary all the time. No matter what their levels are, though, they are determined by your genes' activity according to the environment in which they are placed and according to your genotype as well. So the phenotype and the genotype.
Our scientific understanding of that.
It's cause and effect and cause.
Right. So this is who we're talking about. Top cardiologist. Doesn't understand the difference between causality and an association. Let's actually see what he has to say about this, though. Let's see.
Having cancer lowers your cholesterol.
No, there is an association between cancer patients and a lowering of cholesterol, or rather, a lower cholesterol level. That isn't the same thing. That puts into question how much lower. If it was a longitudinal study that observed them over time, what was the percentage change in cholesterol plus or minus the standard deviation in the group? So therefore, what was the signal to noise ratio for your primary outcome variable? What was the dispersion? What was the noise around that signal? Compare that to patients without cancer if it's not a longitudinal study, or even if it is, actually. What was just the mean cholesterol level in the people at the start and at the end? Compare both of those values to a normal population or a set of populations, they're always called subsets of the population. Inferential statistics, again, being unscientific because you can't actually inform upon the population. That's not how that works. It's a hypothetical, actually. But anyway, compare them to populations that have been studied through descriptive statistics, and also, and then compare them, and then still understand that those can't inform upon an entire population, and still of human beings, and still understand that it is still an association. That's how that works. Okay. Let's continue.
Having all kinds of other diseases lowers your cholesterol.
Nope, covered that. It seems to, is what you should have said. It seems to do so. I'd have to actually see the data on that.
So, in other words, you have the disease, and that causes the low cholesterol.
No, you have now just drawn a cause and effect claim from data that cannot inform on causality. That is not how things go. That is not responsible.
Low cholesterol causing the disease.
So what he's talking about is X causing Y and Y causing X. Just because you see a strong association, does that mean that X is causing Y, or does that mean that Y is causing X? But he completely forgot about the third option, which is that neither of them are causing either of them. So, okay.
I go back to the hard-nosed clinical trial evidence that says in all these trials, in hundreds of thousands of people, lowering cholesterol to very low levels has no perceptible effect on.
You can't inform upon effect, okay? No ostensible or ostensibly no effect, actually.
Lowering cholesterol to very low levels has no perceptible effect on non-cardiovascular death, cancer.
Right. So how were the cholesterol levels lowered, first of all, because not every intervention is the same. And second of all, the main point, is it indicated or is it contraindicated? Buy now, link in the description below for paperback, hardcover, ebook, and self-narrated audiobook edition, because I'm all about authenticity. Second edition, by the way. The second edition. To lower your cholesterol levels through any means, especially a drug. No. The answer is no. It's not indicated, actually. So the answer is that it's contraindicated. Is it indicated or contraindicated? It's contraindicated. Because cholesterol isn't the cause of heart disease. Again, if this person actually knew the etiology of heart disease, he would have understood this. He wouldn't have said what he just said. The man's name is Chris. I mean this with respect. He is much older than I. And he's more familiar with literature than I am. Fair enough. But either way, okay, let's continue.
Anything else. So these U-shaped associations that you see in all of the big populations are due to the fact that even having a hidden disease can cause you to have a low cholesterol.
In your opinion, ostensibly.
And if you take individuals who are healthy, then that dip up at the bottom goes away.
Ostensibly healthy, because you just admitted that there are diseases that you can't even perceive to exist at the time of observation, which means that that person might not be healthy. Healthy being a characteristic that is conferred upon someone that is exhibiting health, which is definitionally speaking the absence of disease process.
And you end up with a nice association that is linear all the way down to very low levels.
Are those done in the exact same populations? Because if not, then you can't really make a causal claim between those. You still can't, even if it were on the same population, but you can make a stronger inference, to be fair. But this gets into the distinction between genotype and phenotype. Not really the distinction between the two, but the fact that genotype and phenotype are not identical between populations. So that's why you actually observe the repeatability of studies. Again, I would presume that he's more familiar with the literature than I am. I would hope so, actually. So if he's observing these, and if he's actually seen these observations, then that's fine. You still cannot draw causal links between the two. At the end of the day, cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease. The whole conversation that we're having right now is a complete waste of time, therefore. It is not the cause of heart disease. We'll see if we actually get into it.
So the negative association of low cholesterol with other diseases is driven by the other diseases, not the low.
In your opinion. And you know what? It makes sense why that would be the case. But it also doesn't, in a way. What is the mechanism there? What I really meant was that it makes sense that there would be an association between disease presentation and cholesterol levels, because cholesterol is important in the healing process, the repair process of the body. Most of your cholesterol, irrespective of the amount of cholesterol and saturated fat that you're consuming, is produced via the liver. You're not actually deriving it, exogenously. So what, can you have a slowed rate of liver function or something when you're sick? I'm just speculating here.
So Professor Packard is explaining that many chronic diseases lower cholesterol levels. This includes...
They are associated with that. What is by the way, again, what is, when you look at the mean, well, I already covered this in the beginning. Let's say that you're looking at a population of people, a large population of people that have diseases. All diseases. You're just throwing them all in there. Okay, which can also add some noise, by the way, but whatever, fine. And you're looking at the association between their cholesterol levels and the cholesterol levels in a population that isn't diseased, at least ostensibly. Covered that as well. They might have a disease, like he just said, like Chris just said, but you can't actually detect it. So ostensibly healthy individuals. And you're going to compare the differences. First of all, you're going to need to look at the distribution of cholesterol in the first place. If cholesterol is your primary outcome variable, if that's the random variable that you're studying, and you form a continuous probability density function of the cholesterol levels, you find the mean and then the standard deviation. You're going to have to see if it's actually normally distributed or not, because if it's not, then you're going to have to report the median, plus or minus the MAD, the median average deviation. But either way, let's say that they're, just for the sake of the argument, let's say they're both normally distributed. What is the mean cholesterol level in those populations? And how does that compare to the healthy populations? What is the actual difference? What is the percentage and also absolute difference between those two populations? This is what you must do when you look at prospective cohort studies as well. Because whenever you do it in prospective cohort studies, you find that the values, the absolute values, are in the tenths or hundredths of thousands of incidents of death, whatever the outcome is in the study, per person per year of follow-up. So that's a problem. But what is the percentage and also absolute difference? You want relative and absolute statistics next to each other. You want them both reported. You don't want one versus the other. You don't want just absolute ones, but you also don't want relative ones in isolation. So that's the first thing that you must look at. But the second thing is, if you're going to study a cancer population over time, which I think would be the thing that I just described would be the first step. The second thing that would be the second step would be, okay, let's study these people, let's study these diseased patients over time, even if it's over the course of like 2 years. And let's see how their cholesterol levels change. Now, there is a confounder there that's really, really significant and relevant, which is, what if those diseased people go into remission? Perhaps when they go into remission, you remove them from the study. You remove them from the data set. That'll help to control for that confounding variable. So, okay, you do that. You keep only the diseased people in over that amount of time, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be. And then you see the trend in cholesterol level. But this would also only matter, really, if, number one, you could continuously measure cholesterol levels, which that's not happening. You could follow up since that's not happening. You can follow up regularly because cholesterol levels fluctuate up and down constantly. So if you're doing it once a year, studying these people and redrawing their blood and all that, that's not sufficient. But also, the most important thing is making sure that at the time of the conduction of that study, the time of the observation, those people are newly sick and diseased. Because if they've been diseased for 5 years, their level might not change at all if this is a causal relationship between high cholesterol or normal cholesterol levels being higher when you're healthy versus when you become diseased. What if the person was already diseased for 5 years, so their cholesterol level was all the way down, assuming that this is a causal relationship? This is actually true. Well, then their cholesterol level won't change at all, potentially. These things need to be measured. Again, he's more familiar, I would hope, with the literature. He's a scientist. I think he is, at least. They said he's a cardiologist, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily a scientist. But that's your best inference. That's the second step. Because then, if that happens, you go, oh, okay. And then the third step is testing the repeatability of that. You see the problems with all this, though? It takes a long time, but also it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money. So, something to keep in mind. A lot of times when these studies aren't done, it's not because of it's not because they don't want to study the thing. It's oftentimes because it costs money. And a lot of times when you see these studies, it's because it costs money to do a better one. It doesn't change the fact that the studies are a problem. But a lot of times it's not with malice and forethought. So, anyway.
Severe malnutrition, critical physical.
Well, that makes sense. See, this is also why I said that there's a confounder here. If you lump all of the diseases together, not every disease is the same. Not every disease is the same. What if one of them, if you isolated cases with those presentations of that illness, actually exhibited over time in a prospective fashion higher cholesterol levels? Oh, and I'm sorry. Look at this. Look at this on the screen. I meant to say this earlier, but I didn't because I was going to give them grace and just assume that they were meaning exactly what they were talking about and exactly what they were saying. Guess not. I'm always just bitten right in the when it comes to being forgiving. Causes of acquired LDL deficiency. So not cholesterol, LDL, which is a subfraction, it's a lipoprotein carrier for cholesterol of many other lipoproteins and subfractions of, or subfractions thereof. So now we're, okay. All right. So severe malnutrition actually makes sense. Perhaps the lowering of LDL that you see on a vegan diet is due to malnutrition. You're not getting enough. Anyway. I mean, if the amount of cholesterol that you create is determined by your genes and very little by what you're eating, so long as you were actually given the adequate substrate to create the cholesterol that you require, is that not a sign that the amount of cholesterol that's in your blood is exactly what the body wants it to be at? And it's actually completely normal and good to have it at that degree instead of just eating plants, munching on celery and shit to get it lower? All you've proven is that if you remove from the body the substrate that it requires to produce a steady amount of cholesterol that that has diminishing returns in terms of its production rate, so it maxes out at some point, obviously, when you're genetically normal. Doesn't that just prove that all that does is prove, that then your cholesterol level will go down when you don't provide it enough substrate. So you're just starving the body of cholesterol, are you not? It's not a level that you want to be at. I don't know.
Illness, malabsorption, liver disease, blood disorders, cancers, infections, and on and on. And this is for several reasons. First, when people are sick, they tend to eat less and they tend to lose weight.
Okay, purported reasons that I would probably agree with. They eat less, they tend to lose weight. Okay. So, sure, there you go. But there's a confounder there. So it's not actually due to the disease per se.
And that causes cholesterol to drop.
It's associated with it, yep.
Also, these diseases can affect absorption in the gut, so less cholesterol gets absorbed in the first place. And finally, diseases like cancer suck up cholesterol from the blood. The actual cancer cells take up a lot of cholesterol from the bloodstream to support their rapid growth and multiplication.
That makes sense because every single cell requires cholesterol in its cell membranes, 40 to 50%. So that actually makes sense. Well, there you go. There you go.
For all these reasons, it's common to see in people who have these chronic diseases, cholesterol levels slowly drift down with time. And Professor Packard also referred to clinical trial evidence. So just show you one example of that real quick.
All right, so let's take a look at this. Efficacy, so nope, but we'll just brush past that to get to the actual substantive material. Efficacy and safety, can't inform upon that either, of more intensive lowering of LDL cholesterol, not cholesterol. LDL. It's not LDL cholesterol, it's LDL, which carries cholesterol to other parts of the body. That matters. A meta-analysis of data. Okay, so it's a meta-analysis. Good. So let's talk about meta-analyses for a minute. Okay. A meta-analysis is an aggregation of a bunch of other analyses, a bunch of trials. Okay. The idea behind a meta-analysis is that in order to assess the overall signal that you have derived from a certain area of investigation, a topic of investigation, you take all of the available data that has actually been done on said topic and you aggregate those numbers together. Okay, you get a very large sample size compared to the individual sample sizes. And you get an aggregate signal to noise ratio, mean plus or minus standard deviation, or median plus or minus MAD, depending on the distribution of that random variable or many random variables. Oftentimes, you're studying multiple. Total cholesterol, LDL, insulin levels, glucose levels. You're usually measuring a lot of that in like human nutrition science, for example. Okay. The idea is great, and it actually does have utility whenever it's done properly. What do I mean by properly? Well, if you're going to aggregate a bunch of meta-analyses into, well, a bunch of analyses into one major meta-analysis, you better make sure that the studies were effectively the exact same. Eddie, that's really unrealistic and stupid. That is impossible. That is literally impossible. Yep. Don't blame me for that. Let's actually talk about why that matters. Why does that matter? The reason it sounds so unbelievable is because if it's not possible to do, and therefore it's not possible to actually conduct what people believe to be science, then it must not be true. Like, it can't be true. Allow me to explain why it is true, whether I like it or not, whether you like it or not. I wish this weren't the case. Let's say that you have two analyses. You're only going to combine two. Okay, it was done on the same topic. You're trying to investigate the relationship between cholesterol and heart disease. Very, 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 very classic. Okay. Imagine that one of those studies was, they're all clinical trials, fine. But one of them is done on a group of 100 people. And it was done over the course of 2 weeks with a different dietary protocol. So they still tried to lower cholesterol, but they told them to lower cholesterol in their diet without telling them to go plant-based. But in the other study, they told them to go plant-based or something. Fine. And what they were doing was over the course of 2 weeks in this study, out of the two, in this one study, they were going to measure things like what are considered the major risk factors for heart disease, like hypertension changes, changes in arterial stiffness or something. I mean, just choose whatever you want to choose. Triglyceride levels, like whatever it may be. Okay. Let's say the other study, like I said, it also they tell them to go plant-based. They measure the same outcome variables, which is why they're being lumped into a meta-analysis. This was done on like 10 people, 12 people, you know what, let's say 25 people. And they also did this over the course of a year. Okay. Can you responsibly combine those studies into a meta-analysis? Nope. No, you can't. Why? Because they're not the same study. They're measuring the same things. They're focusing on the same interventional variable, cholesterol intake. They are not, by any means, the same study in any way, shape, or form. Okay? You have to look at the methodologies. Okay? Some scientists will do this, which is why they won't lump every single study done on the same topic into one meta-analysis. They'll do the ones that are actually relatively the same in methodology, and or they'll actually look at the integrity of the individual studies themselves, which is the second thing I was going to say. You have to look at the integrity of the individual studies, which is usually done by looking at the methodologies, the conflict of interests, and all that stuff. All right. But nevertheless, the final thing that we need to get out of the way is that the selection criteria by which a study can actually compose a meta-analysis is completely arbitrarily chosen by the authors. So there's some cherry picking involved as well, oftentimes. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Carefully selecting your data. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at before combining studies into a meta-analysis. So that's why I brought that up. A meta-analysis, we need to actually look at the integrity of each individual study. But that's going to be really difficult to do because it's made up of 26 randomized trials. So I would really hope that if we look at this study, they put the table of what the results were of the previous studies. But even then, that's not going to show the methodologies. That's not going to show. You have to cross-reference. This takes time to look at these, okay? But okay, a meta-analysis of data from 170,000 participants in 26 randomized trials. Okay, cool, 170,000. Great. So can the results of this study be extrapolated beyond those 170,000 participants? Not factually. No, you can make inferences through opinionation about the majority of the population. You cannot make causal inferences, though, and attribute those to every single person in the population. Okay? That's something to mention. That is something to keep in mind. 26 randomized trials. Okay. Sample sizes are put into question. Therefore, the subsequent statistical power. Genotype and phenotype. Were these people diseased at the outset? How identical were they? You can't get completely identical, but how identical were they across these 26 trials? The age group, etc., etc. The signal-to-noise ratio doesn't really need to be put into question for any of these random variables because that will be reflected in the meta-analysis so long as they actually did the sort of, oftentimes a bootstrap simulation is done, so long as it was done properly and appropriately. Okay, I actually do that all the time with numbers in other areas of my life. So, okay. Background: lowering of LDL cholesterol, not cholesterol, with standard statin regimes. Okay, so this is done with, well, let's finish the whole sentence. Reduces the risk, no, whatever you're going to say afterwards, no, because risk is a cause and effect statement. It is associated with a lower incidence of a certain relative difference between controls. Okay, that's what that means. Of occlusive vascular events in a wide range of individuals. Yeah, again, it's an association. And also the mechanism is quite clear there. We aimed to assess the safety and efficacy, which you're not going to be able to inform upon, that is an opinion, of more intensive lowering of LDL cholesterol with statin therapy. Good. So criminal behavior, but whatever. Methods. We undertook meta-analyses of individual participant data from randomized trials. Undertook meta-analyses, plural. Okay. I think that's a grammar technicality. Of individual participant data from randomized trials involving at least 1,000 participants and at least 2 years treatment duration of more versus less intensive statin regimes. 5 trials, 39,612 individuals, median follow-up, 5.1 years. Okay, so the follow-up, see how they reported median follow-up? Because it was vastly skewed in terms of the follow-up between the trials. At least the median hedges against the influence of that skew. So at least they reported the median. But it just goes to show that it's showing differences in the studies. Okay? And of statin versus control. 21 trials. Okay. More versus less intensive statin regimes. And of statin versus control. Okay, so 21 trials. So again, these are different studies. These are different. Median follow-up 4.8. Is it 428 or 4.8? I'm hoping about 4.8. For each type of trial, we calculated not only the average risk reduction, no, incidence reduction, observation reduction, and not reduction. Reduction is another cause and effect statement. But also the average risk reduction, blah, blah, already covered that, per 1.0 millimoles per liter LDL cholesterol reduction, not cholesterol reduction, at 1 year after randomization. Okay. Great. So what we're looking at is a bunch of associations. And again, I would like to know the signal-to-noise ratio, the aggregate signal-to-noise ratio for the median plus or minus MAD or mean plus or minus standard deviation if you did a bootstrap simulation and a Laplace distribution or whatever the you call it. I can't remember what it's called for the variables that were skewed, and then combine those together. Because, well, that matters. Does the noise completely swamp the signal here? Don't just report an average. Every time that someone reports an average, there's a plus or minus after that average. Always. No matter what.
That real quick. So this large study looked at 26 randomized trials where cholesterol was lowered with medication. So if low...
It's not medication, it's a drug. It's a contraindicated drug. Covered that in my book as well. Look at the history behind the administration, the introduction of statins. Go take a look at that. Go look at the association between statin-taking populations and ALS, an invariably fatal condition. Go take a look at that.
Cholesterol raises risk of dying, then these people with
You can't inform upon risk. Done.
cholesterol lowered should die more, right?
No, well, see how that's not what can be informed upon, though? And so making that assumption is completely ignorant and stupid.
Well, we see exactly the opposite. Not only was there a reduction in major vascular events like...
No, there was an associated lower incidence rate. You are drawing a causal relationship here because that's your opinion based on the observation. That's fine. We understand the mechanism, by the way, which is that soft plaque, the most unstable plaque in arteries that actually will rupture and cause thrombi, blood clots, so therefore a myocardial infarction and or a stroke, is made up primarily of fat and cholesterol. Like 50 to 60% of it is. All right? So if you remove the amount of cholesterol that can remain there in the form of LDL and certain subfractions of lipoproteins like SD-LDL, you can get a reduction in plaque. The plaque being, once again, the thing that will actually cause the blood clot. You know what else you can do is you could get rid of the reason that the plaque is there, which is because of damage. It's damage to arteries. Okay, that it's damage to arteries, Gil. Atherosclerosis occurs in lesions. Lesions. Damage to arteries over decades, by the way. You always have damage to your arteries every day, but your body has an opportunity to heal from that. Unless you are dumping sugar down your throat every day, for example. Or dumping plants down your throat every day. Because plants have toxins that we are not genotypically evolved to withstand. So, anyway, cool. Oh, look. Also, this is always fun. Whenever they employ inferential statistics in a field that is completely inappropriate to apply such a science to. 95% confidence interval. 11 to 18. Good. So a range. So just so you know, as someone that might not understand statistics, a confidence interval is an interval range whereby you are purported to be able to have 95% confidence, or whatever your confidence level is. Sometimes it's 90%, sometimes it's 99%. It just depends on choice. You can choose whatever level you want, which that's not a problem, but by which you are purported to have 95% confidence in this case that the mean of the random variable that you're studying in the population, I'll get to that in a minute, will lie within. So it'll lie between 11 and 18, which, by the way, is sort of depending on your metric, is kind of a wide range, right? The reduction in LDL cholesterol at 1 year was 0.51 millimoles per liter. More intensive regimes produced a highly significant 15%. Okay, so it's a percent. 11 to 18%. Okay, so not really that large of an amount. Okay, fine. However, the population is a completely hypothetical construct that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. You're not actually informing upon the population of human beings. You can't possibly do that. It's literally impossible to do that. You are informing upon a hypothetical construct that is a population that shares effectively the same variables, is subject to the same confounding and or spurious variables that exhibit the same behavior as observed that your cases did in the studies you did observe at that time and over that period of time. It is completely nonsensical. Inferential statistics is completely inappropriate to employ and use in the area of human nutrition science. And that's what this is. This is clinical science for human beings. So anyway, yes, we saw that there was a lower incidence rate of what? 15%. That is a relative outcome statistic. What does that equate to in absolute terms? Because you were talking about what? 22 studies? What was the aggregate sample size? And also, no, we're not looking at an aggregate sample size because you just talked about some studies, more intensive regimes. So you're talking about them individually. Highly significant, so statistically significant, which doesn't matter necessarily. It's better than not statistically significant, but it's not a be-all, end-all when it comes to its utility. 15%. 50% further reduction. No. Decreased incidence, once again. Associated incidence. Which equates to what? How many deaths in absolute terms? Because you said it maxed out on those studies. They had to have at least 1,000 people, which is good. Okay, so what are we talking about? 150 at least. Again, we're looking at an association anyway. The mechanism is clear.
Heart attacks and strokes.
Okay, so we're talking about, again, 13%. confidence interval 7 to 19. That's wide. Not to say that they really mean anything, but okay. And then stroke of 16%. So they're really around the same, between 15 and 20%. Plus or minus what though? No, it wouldn't be. No, it wouldn't be plus or minus in those. That's not how that works. It'd be plus or minus if you added up all those percentages into one average or something like that. Yeah.
All-cause mortality, which means total deaths, were reduced. So these people
No, not reduced. There was a lower incidence. We're done.
are living longer. And this is largely due.
If you want to actually look at the amount of time that you can maybe gain if there's a causal relationship here by taking statins, why don't you take a look at the meta-analysis that actually observed all available studies at the time of conduction of that, at the time of observation, on statin-taking populations and their compared lifespan, where you see that it's a median of like 3.4 or 3.2 and 4.1 days, depending on if you were someone that had previously suffered a heart attack or hadn't suffered a heart attack at all. There was no amount of time that was of any significance. And I'm not talking about statistical significance here.
to reductions in deaths due to coronary heart disease. Where
All right, so what is the cause of heart disease, Gil? Why are we even talking about this? You want to get into the numbers? I'm getting into the numbers here. What are the actual causes of heart disease, Gil? We've covered this before, and I'll cover it again. I covered it in my book, for example. We get into the hemodynamics of heart disease. In fact, we actually start taking a look at things deeply, going backwards a bit, but that's okay. Anyway,
there was no change in deaths due to cancer or other non-vascular causes. So lowering cholesterol reduces the risk of dying of.
no, that is not what can be informed upon, Gil. Those weren't even significant differences. You're talking about statistical significance, which is an arbitrary cutoff. It doesn't measure effect size. It's an arbitrary cutoff based on a p-value.
Heart disease, cardiovascular diseases doesn't seem to affect the risk of dying of other causes that are not vascular.
Well, at least you said the word seem beforehand. Then you could say risk, because then you're implying that it's your opinion.
The net effect is a lower total risk of death.
No, that is your opinion, Gil. Learn how to actually convey responsibly statistics. You're a scientist. You should know this.
I saw one study that adjusted for malnutrition.
So now we're talking about adjustment. Depends on what study you're talking about and what you mean by adjustment. Usually what's meant is multivariate regression, which is fabrication of data, because you can inflate the power of your result by stacking a bunch of univariate regressions on top of one another to the point of actually changing the entire result to a diametric value compared to what was actually observed. So that is fabrication. That is not actual science, because scientists report what they observed, not what they think they would have observed if they had done the study differently in an ideal world where they could have controlled for the variables that they would have liked to control for. The only responsible way of doing this, if you wanted to actually control for like smoking or something in a study, is by removing people that reported to have been smoking at any point during the time of the conduction of the study, so during the time of observation, from the data set, because then you're still reporting what you observed. You're just shrinking your sample size. You're still reporting what you observed. You're not adding in a univariate regression, or 2 or 3 or 10.
And that was enough, if I remember correctly, that was enough to eliminate that tail that goes up.
Okay, so I don't really care about that because that's not what's actually observed. So now we're just talking about chimera here.
So that's pretty striking. Just malnutrition alone, I guess, in the context of cancer or some of these chronic diseases of old age. Yeah, that kind of brought that tail to the null range. So here I was referring to this study where they saw the
non-HDL cholesterol paradox and effect of underlying malnutrition in patients with coronary artery disease, a 41,182 cohort study. Right, so if the results were adjusted for, I'd like to see the raw outcome data. Okay? Also, even if the raw outcome data shows something similar, I don't really care. This is bread and circuses. This is a distraction. This is myopia. This is being tangled in weeds. Cholesterol isn't the cause of heart disease. Damage to the arteries is. If you've ever seen a fire triangle, the fire pyramid, you have 3 ingredients that you need for a fire: a fuel source, oxygen, and heat. You remove any one of those, you won't have the fire. Heart disease is the exact same. Cholesterol, particularly LDL, damage to arteries, and then there was one other that I found, I came up with in another video, and I've forgotten it now, of course. Inflammation, I suppose. It would be inflammation. You actually need an inflammatory cascade. If you shut down the inflammatory mediators, you can have damage to your arteries and cholesterol, but they won't necessarily go to that area if there's not an inflammatory cascade. Well, they might still do that. I can't exactly remember. They probably would still do that. You just might have a decrease in the rate of progression. That's really what I was trying to refer to, or trying to hint at. So anyway,
risk go up as the cholesterol got lower. They're looking at.
All right, let's take a look at this here. Reference equals 2.2 millimoles, right? Okay. Per liter. P for nonlinear equals 0.001. Right, so for a nonlinear regression, nonlinear association here. Wow, Gil. Look at the spread on that. Granted, though, we're dealing with pretty small ranges here. I mean, we're talking about 0.5, 1.0. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? That's a hazard ratio. So really an incidence ratio. No. That's a pretty large spread. Gil, this is ridiculous. This is why it's important to really, really, really assess the graphs first before you start talking about them. But Gil, this is really bad. This is bad. This is an incidence ratio, not a hazard ratio, with a massive spread, and that's with a confidence interval, which means it'll be even worse. It would be even worse if you reported the actual standard deviation, the actual spread. Are you out of your mind, Gil? This doesn't show, and this is adjusted for. Are you out of your mind? Gil. I mean, I'm getting this right, correct? Non-HDL-C levels, 5 millimoles per liter to 10 to 15, as observed in these 47,000 people, and adjusted for. And you see a relationship. And by the way, even the line here, like there's an association, and then it just tapers off. It's pretty damn straight.
Where they saw the death risk go up as the cholesterol got lower. They're looking at non-HDL cholesterol, which is basically all the cholesterol except for HDL.
So in other words, this graph doesn't show anything of any utility at all, Gil. Look at the confidence interval around that. Look at the spread of that, which once again, take the mean of the data, And then the number after the plus or minus that was actually used to formulate this confidence interval for every single value here on the x-axis. Go ahead and divide that number by the respective t-score for your confidence level, and then multiply the remaining value, your actual quotient, by the square root of the sample size that was used to collect an infinite number of samples from the population. So yeah, it's your sample size. Hypothetical infinite number of samples from the population. That's what you do. Okay? Then you'll get what the actual spread is. That's what it would be. This doesn't show anything.
It's the same logic as LDL or total cholesterol, all the same principle. As the cholesterol level gets lower and lower and actually into the normal range, death risk shoots up. So this is...
It's not risk, Gil.
Raw data. Now, when they adjust for age and also...
Oh, this is the raw data. Okay, fine. Still, now when they adjust, you get a completely fabricated data set.
of pre-existing diseases, then it looked like this. That rise in...
So see how you just completely changed the result? See that? Take a look at that. That's what happens whenever you fabricate data, okay? By using multivariate regression on a longitudinal study and observation. Okay, non-HDLC, 0 to 15, and then you have low, and then it goes up and up and up and up and up, with also massive spread. Again, still, okay?
That we saw on the left of the previous graph, that's all or virtually all gone.
Gil, it is adjusted for. Therefore, it is fabricated and means nothing. I'm not looking at that, nor should anyone.
So that's saying it was older people and sicker people who showed that trend of increasing death risk on lower.
Gil, did you remove them from the data set, or did you try and control for them by adding univariate regressions into the regression?
Cholesterol. Then they adjusted for malnutrition status. And
all right, so more adjustments, so more fabrication. The only thing that matters is the graph on the top left.
It comes down even more, and then adjust for everything, all the factors.
The only thing that matters is the one on the top left.
We mentioned so far all together, and it's pretty much a perfect straight line up. The higher the cholesterol level, the higher the risk of death.
Not the risk of death. We already covered that, Gil. You don't understand risk. You clearly don't understand numbers.
Basically, in people who already have a chronic disease or who are malnourished, low cholesterol correlates with higher risk of death.
Not risk, Gil. Already covered it. We already know the mechanisms of heart disease. We're done.
But in people who don't have those, in healthy individuals, the higher the cholesterol level, the higher the risk of death.
Nope, not true. You pulled that out of your hole, Gil.
Here's another way to look at the same data.
I don't really... Well, we already looked at the data. Gil. Yeah, well, look at this. Okay, so see? Look at this. Events/patients, incidence. You see that word incidence, Gil? You see how it doesn't say risk? It's an incidence. For sake, Gil. Unbelievable. 5,247 out of 41,182, so 12.74%. Right, so that's intervention over, what do you call it? Control. So not controlled, though, because they don't control for those. To get the, so events over how many patients? Yep. Hazard ratio 1.16. It's an incidence ratio. And also, where the did they get 1.16 from? 5,247 divided by 41,182 is not 1.16. Neither is the complement of 5,247 in this situation. An incidence ratio is measured by intervention versus control. Incidence in both groups. So what the hell is going on here?
So raw data, no adjustments, higher risk of death with lower cholesterol.
It's not a risk of death, Gil. We're done.
Right of that vertical line is higher risk of death. When you adjust for age and pre-existing chronic diseases, no significant effect of having lower cholesterol.
It's not an effect that you're even measuring, Gil.
And then when you adjust for malnutrition status, lower risk of death.
It's not risk. Okay, done. And also the adjustments don't matter.
Lower cholesterol. And you adjust for everything at the same time, similar result. But yeah, I think the strongest argument is, like you said, the randomized trials, and then the genetics also. And then in the genetics, same as the randomized trials, if anything, we see lower mortality with lower cholesterol. And the randomized trials, when we look at meta-analyses, same thing. We tend to see lower mortality. So I just don't see how that could be cause and effect from the epidemiological studies.
Right. So now you wanna go ahead and start questioning causal relationships being made and causal claims being made from associative data whenever it doesn't fit your agenda. That's what you want to go ahead and do. You do it all the time, Gil. You're not the only one. You do it all the time. It's really interesting to see how people get all skeptical and all this logic comes to the forefront of their brain and all this nuance that they actually start to recognize whenever it has to do with any conclusion that doesn't align with their agenda. Really interesting how that just comes out. Because it doesn't come out whenever it fits your agenda.
So here we're referring to clinical trials, we already touched on those, and also genetics. So there are genetic studies where they look at people who have low cholesterol from birth, right? So it's genetically determined.
No, this is a bunch of bullshit, Gil. Cholesterol levels vary up and down, and also, all the time. And also, this is dependent on genotype and phenotype, the environment in which the genes are placed. The studies you're referring to do not continuously measure cholesterol. Usually what you're referring to is Mendelian randomization studies, which are piss poor studies, which involve measuring people one time and then looking at the incidence of heart disease or something like that later on. Gil, these are studies.
And so if having low cholesterol kills, if it raises risk of dying, then these people should die more.
No, that's actually not how that works either. Study logic. Association doesn't equal causation, but also lack of an association does not mean lack of causation. See how associations are really nuanced, Gil? That's not how that works. Why? Because you could have two variables that are causally related, X and Y, that can be directly coupled to each other, one-to-one, R squared value of 1 for a linear relationship, that are not causally related to each other, actually. So I say causally linked in the beginning. I mean ostensibly causally linked. They're fully associated with one another. They can be completely unrelated, but they can just have a confounding variable that has an equal effect on both of them, which causes them to link together. You get rid of the confounder, they both uncouple in terms of their behavior. Same thing with lack of an association. There is a confounding variable that can have an equal effect on X and Y that can uncouple the causal link between them. We have real world examples of this happening too. So Gil, no, that is also not how that works. This is why we look at hard sciences. Physics, hemodynamics. Where does heart disease develop, Gil? Is it all across the vascular system? Or is it in one part of it, particularly in set sites of that one part, so even more isolated? Which are in places where there's higher turbulent blood flow that is exacerbated by hypertension. And this is in genetically normal people, by the way. Genetically abnormal people, they still develop most of their plaque there, but they will develop it all across their vascular system, actually. Sickle cell anemia is an example. Also people that have a genetic knockout of receptors that are involved in the sequestration of excess cholesterol from the bloodstream. Yeah, those people have an issue. They usually die before reaching teenage years, though, so keep that in mind, too.
But we see exactly the opposite. They die less and they live longer. In this study, for example, people with higher genetically determined ApoB.
No, we already covered that. You can't actually determine whether or not they're genotypically more set to developing or producing higher cholesterol when you're not considering phenotype and when you're not considering regular fluctuations in cholesterol levels over time.
or LDL cholesterol,
Not cholesterol.
had more coronary disease, that's expected.
Oh, that's expected. That's expected. Good.
Also, higher all-cause mortality, so total deaths.
Okay, what were the numbers, by the way, as well? Oh, look what the study says. Sorry, I wasn't even going to read it, but then I can't help myself sometimes. I have to read them. TG may increase CAD risk of triglycerides independent of ApoB. Cool. Although the possible presence of pleiotropy is a limitation. Oh, wow. Pleiotropy. Phenotype? The way that genes are expressed? Almost like I said that in the beginning.
But also higher all-cause mortality, so total deaths, and cardiovascular deaths. And that effect was dose-dependent.
No, it's not an effect. Okay, dose-dependent way. What do you mean dose-dependent? You mean that, did you split them up into quintiles? But you split them up into quintiles.
So they're dying more over the period of observation. They're dying younger than folks who don't have high.
Right, and what variables could be interfering with that? What else did these people do? What else did these people not do? What else did these people eat? What else did these people not eat? Gil, do you believe that genetics plays a role in your likelihood of developing a certain condition and your actual lifespan overall, too? Irrespective of literally any other variable? Do you believe that some people are more genetically susceptible to the development of cancer, for example? Oh, okay, so then you can't inform upon causality here, can you? Because it's not an experiment. This isn't experimental science, it's observational science, which means you better be real damn careful and responsible when reporting your results and inferring things about the science. Okay, Gil? We're done.
ApoB or LDL cholesterol.
I mean, with many reasons to suspect and know that it is the disease that's causing the low cholesterol.
No, hold on a minute. So you said suspect and know. Those are not the same things.
Or one aspect of the disease. If you've got cancer, you don't eat, and if you don't eat, your cholesterol goes down.
Well, there you go. But also during fasting, there are times where your LDL can go up. Did you know that? There are associations, rather, is what I should say, between fasting and an increase in LDL of statistical significance beyond baseline. So see how it fluctuates?
If you've got other diseases, you don't eat so well and your cholesterol goes down, or you lose body weight, or you lose mass and your cholesterol goes down. It's just one of these things that happens. Cholesterol is a nutritional indicator, and that's where the malnutrition comes in, as well as an indicator of risk of heart disease.
No, not risk. Covered that. Basically, the main takeaway is that there are associations between diseases and lower cholesterol that are ostensibly due to malnourishment because of a lack of eating. Also, there are other factors that Gil Gil put forth that I think are probably relevant as well, such as the increased consumption of cholesterol from the bloodstream by cancer cells during metastasis. Fair enough. So therefore, that they're saying that explains these associations with lower cholesterol and higher mortality in these U-shaped relationships that you see all the time, where you have higher incidence of death associated with and correlated with lower cholesterol levels. You see the minimum incidence of death as observed is in somewhere in the middle. There's a 220 milligram per deciliter range. And then as you go above that, it gets even higher. Again, like actually, oftentimes you'll see in the graph that I'm referring to, and that's actually in my book as well, it goes even higher than the lower cholesterol end. So It's a U-shaped relationship a lot of times. But okay, cool.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is that other parameters have the same association. So I've seen for blood pressure, for BMI, for glucose, same thing. Once you get in these large epidemiological studies without adjustments, once you get into the normal to low range, you see this tail of mortality going up for all of these things. But that doesn't mean you want your glucose to be high, your blood pressure to be high.
Yes, exactly. That is something sensible that you've said, Gil. Great. That is the problem with believing these associations to be super utilitarian. Just because there's an association between a low value of something and a less incidence or lower incidence rate of death, or whatever the outcome is that you're actually observing, that does not mean that you should be exhibiting lower X or Y or Z. That's not how that works. Exhibit the cholesterol level that is determined by your genes exclusively while consuming a species-appropriate diet for your speciation, that being Homo sapiens sapien, according to the Darwinian principles of evolution and according to the subsequent principles of indication, further according to hard sciences and some soft sciences that still give harder and more objective inferences, like observational paleoanthropology, chemical anthropology, comparative anatomy, and certain elements of our biochemistry. And also logic, by the way. Logic. And then there you go. Forget about this antagonistic plow trippy bullshit. Forget about, oh well. Oh, what's one argument? No, that's really the main one that I'm thinking of. Forget about that argument. Stupid.
It has to be that there's an underlying disease causing these things to be lower.
Well, it doesn't have to be the case that that's happening either. But it's a good hypothesis. Yes.
Sick people get low cholesterol.
Here's an example of what I mean. This is a really powerful visual. So,
all right, so we're looking at more graphs, and I'm already about tired of them, about exhausted of these, because again, we're just looking at association. So again, not a hazard ratio, it's an incidence ratio. 1.0 means there's an exact amount of incidence in both groups. So it would be the intervention and control groups have the same amount of incidence. So at 50, so we're talking about glycated hemoglobin, so HbA1c values in millimoles per mole. Okay, so we're about 50 millimoles per mole. We've got, oh, I see what's going on here. Yeah, okay, so you've got higher incidence there of death for lower glycated hemoglobin, HbA1c, also lower blood pressure, systolic, so the top number. And then LDL levels in millimoles per liter as well. All of them, the lower you get, the higher the incidence is. And then the greater that you get, also the incidence starts to slowly climb up in these. But in glycated hemoglobin, they go up even more in terms of the incidence ratio there. Not hazard ratio, but incidence ratio. And this is this is measuring death from any cause. The incidence of death from any cause is what it's talking about here. So that's a really easy and simple graph to understand. And we already covered the logic behind that. Okay. So yes, cool.
Powerful visual. So the black curve with that gray shade, right? Black and gray, that's cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. So it kind of makes the shape of the.
No, it's not cholesterol and it's not LDL cholesterol. It's LDL, Gil. Stop.
So with very high cholesterol, we see more death. And then in the middle, kind of middle range of cholesterol, maybe a little bit high, we see the lowest death. And then with low cholesterol or.
What was the sample size, by the way, and how long did the study go on for?
Cholesterol, even, we see high death again. It goes up again. We already looked at what happens when you adjust these curves for malnutrition or.
Oh, God, yeah. We already saw what happens when you fabricate the data. Yeah, we did.
Disease. But here's the same curve for hemoglobin A1c.
Basically, what we're looking at when we're looking at a hazard ratio here, since this is looking at one cohort, what we're looking at is the denominator of this ratio being in reference to a value. In the case of, glycated hemoglobin, systolic blood pressure, LDL, whatever it may be, that is most associated with the lowest incidence of death from any cause in the study that they are referencing, which could also have been adjusted itself. We're told that this is raw outcome data. That's great. I hope so. But just take a look at this. This dotted line here, this is their 1.0. This is their baseline, you know, safe hazard ratio. This is their baseline level. Look at where it intersects the glycated hemoglobin at like 45, 46, and 51 or so, which translates, I mean, we're talking about 6.3%, 6.8% HbA1c, and that's the reference point. Is that good? Systolic blood pressure is the purple, so that intersects at once here at a value of 135 or so. So that's also not great. Why was that their baseline? Why was that their baseline? And then what? It intersects this at two places, LDL in millimoles per liter. I don't really care. I don't care about this. Anyway, I try and I like analyzing the data for a bit, unless it literally doesn't mean anything. In this case, it doesn't mean anything.
That's glycated hemoglobin, so an average of glucose levels. That's the red and pink curve. It also makes a sort of a U or a V, right? The lowest point, where you see the lowest mortality, this is about 6.5% hemoglobin A1c. That's diabetes and prediabetes range.
Yep. Exactly. That's what I was just saying. That's what I was just saying.
So lower than that, so normal glucose levels, normal hemoglobin A1c levels, we see a higher risk of death.
No, a higher incidence of death.
That's anyone who's healthy. I'm much lower than this. So it's the same exact phenomenon, the same exact curves that we see with cholesterol. And the last one is blood pressure, the purple curve. Same exact thing. It makes sort of a U or sort of a V. The lowest point is about maybe 130, 140 millimeters mercury. This is systolic blood pressure. But this isn't a very good blood pressure.
Nope.
Recommended now is under 120. 140 is already like stage 2 hypertension. So these curves are showing that everybody below that, which is considered healthy blood pressure, have higher risk of dying.
When will it end? When will it end? The use of this word.
So is the conclusion here that we should try to have high blood pressure and high glucose levels and be hypertensive and be diabetic? Of course not. These curves.
Yeah, no, the conclusion is association doesn't equal causation, Gil. That's the conclusion.
Are an artifact of old age and chronic disease and malnutrition in those settings. Most people who die in our society tend to be older, and they often have these diseases. They have cancers, they have infections, they have frailty, they lose weight. And so that causes their blood pressure and their glucose and their cholesterol to come down during that disease stage or that old age, more frail stage. And that creates this association between these lower markers and death. We know it's
Right, so are we going to get into how cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, though, Gil? I mean, are we actually going to get into the mechanisms that matter? Because we're just looking at a bunch of human nutrition science that's mostly adjusted for.
not cause and effect, because if you lower
And you can't inform upon cause and effect in this science.
or blood pressure or cholesterol with healthy lifestyle or with medication in people who need it, we see lower mortality. We see lower risk of death.
Not risk of death. You got it right the first time when you said you see lower mortality in the people studied for the duration of time they've been studied for. Sorry, Gil. You messed it up at the end.
Things are corrected, right? We don't see people dying more when these things are fixed. So this has to be a spurious association. It has to be an artifact. And we know it is because we already saw that when you adjust it for chronic disease or malnutrition, that effect goes away. And it's a kind of
It's not an effect that you saw. The phenomenon you saw disappears after you fabricate the data.
interesting aspect of our society, although an unfortunate aspect, that throughout most of our adult lives, when we are middle aged, give or take 30s, 40s, 50s, our body weight tends to be a little too high, blood pressure a little too high, cholesterol a little too high, etc. For most people, for the average Westerner, right? And most people don't die during those years. And so that corresponds to this lowest point of the graph. Most people are not dying, and yet their cholesterol and blood pressure and glucose is not great. And then later,
Who's to say that when it comes to cholesterol? This is complete and utter nonsense, Gil, and we covered it.
life 60, 70, 80, a lot of times they have these chronic diseases like cancers or chronic infections and frailty, and they lose weight and they become more frail, and some of these metrics come down. The BMI comes down, the blood pressure comes down, the glucose comes down, the cholesterol comes down, and those are the phases where they tend to die at this later period, right? So it creates this association.
Right, so association doesn't equal causation, and lack of association doesn't necessarily mean lack of causation. Good, Gil. Glad we got it out of the way. Cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. Gil, we're done.
Between the lower metrics and the higher risk of death. And that produces this weird tail of the graph.
Well, that's your opinion. That's your hypothesis. That's your theory.
Which, when we adjust for malnutrition and chronic disease, that tail goes away. So, bottom line, in a healthy individual without a chronic disease, having glucose in the normal range and blood pressure in the normal range and cholesterol in the normal range is a good thing. It's better for your health.
No. When it comes to cholesterol, no. You have no evidence to support that claim whatsoever. You do not know the etiology of heart disease at all, and it shows, Gil. You don't have any ability to you have no grasp of these important concepts.
Anything, it's better for your risk of death. It keeps it lower.
No, that's your opinion, Gil.
Unfortunately, those people are the minority in our society. How can we bring
Oh my God.
down our cholesterol and our glucose?
Well, the latter is actually important. The former is not so important at all. It's not important whatsoever. But the solution to acquiring an indicated outset and affect and presentation is to consume a species-appropriate, species-specific diet for your speciation. That being a 100% carnivorous diet consisting primarily of the muscle meat and the fat associated with that of what seems to be large ruminant animals, with added fat, given our modern context, in the forms of butter, tallow, lard, suet, and ghee, added salt to taste, and water, transitioning appropriately, prudently, over the course of 6 to 8 weeks at least, maybe even longer, depending on who you are.
In a healthy way. I actually just published a video going over that in detail. I cut my cholesterol and my ApoB in half, and I covered all of it. Check it out right here.
Well, that's probably not a good thing, Gil. Seriously.
I'll meet you in there.
No, you won't. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we got through all of that. Glad that we don't have to listen to this any longer. The arrogance is astounding, frankly. And I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of other people pretending like it's anything but arrogance, because that's exactly what it is. It's man attempting to play God. So, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Subscribe to me if you haven't already. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'm not really sure what you're doing. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Buy my book, Contrainidicated, as well, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you have not bought this already, as I alluded to in the beginning, subscribe to the Patreon as well to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, loads of antiquated videos from before I was ever a public figure, loads of Patreon exclusive uploads from whenever I was doing that sort of thing once a week as well. and an exclusive Discord server for Tier 3 members if you're interested in that sort of thing. And also, link on the bottom of the screen. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase products through that link, you will get a permanent percentage discount, permanent free shipping when signing up for monthly deliveries. And if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki@pm.me, I can tell you how to earn those products for free. Because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But before buying these products, including those ones, I wouldn't recommend doing that at all until you actually learn about them. And fortunately for you, I have a link in the top right corner of the screen, a Cerule Products link, which is a complete video explanation of what those products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. And I'll also further migrate to the description below to find a video that I did on these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you are willing to make a contribution to the company via a purchase. So, with that being said, join me next time when we are reacting to more pseudoscience and fabrication of data in order to justify the position, the completely unscientific position that cholesterol causes heart disease and therefore you should stop eating a bunch of saturated fat. So, till then,